Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 and 93.7 FM, KPNW Studios. It's baseball season. I'm Chigger McGee, sometimes known as Bill London. If I was really Chigger McGee, I'd be shortstop. Anyway, welcome to Crazy Oregon News, brought to you by Sean Sutherland. You know, you may have questions about your insurance. You may have a lot of questions about your insurance. You may be trying to figure out, what am I going to do for Medicare? Or maybe you're trying to figure out whether your homeowner's policy really will cover you if, say, something, catastrophic happens. Ask Insurance. That's Sean Sutherland's insurance company, and he is the answer man. You have questions, he has answers. And when you have a question, ask Insurance. All right, so here's a look at some of the stories we are following. And by the way, I brought up baseball season. Congratulations to Ichiro Suzuki for being the first Japanese player inducted into the MLB Hall of Fame. I have fond memories of taking my 8-year-old up to Seattle to watch Ichiro play. So, just needed to say that. All right, here's a look at some of our crazy Oregon news. So, in an abrupt turnaround, and I don't think we had talked about this the last time we did the Crazy Oregon News, but it was an abrupt turnaround after getting fully lit up by ag group small farmers and their customers. Governor Tina Kotek directed the Department of Land Conservation and Development to immediately stop farm stand rulemaking and reassess next steps amid criticism about the harmful impact of the planned rule changes. Now, Kotek said in a statement, in part, I want to reassure farmers who've been anxious and frustrated about how proposed changes to existing rules regarding farm stand operations may affect their businesses that I hear you and I'm paying attention. Now, many of the state's most popular family farms have been sounding the alarm over these planned changes by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and almost all of these farmers were echoing the same message. These rules, as proposed, would essentially shut them down. Now, essentially, the state was trying to regulate everything, from things like hayrides to whether they could sell pumpkin carvers, those little pumpkin carving knives, whether they could even sell those. Now, in that particular case, the state was saying, well, they don't make these, therefore they shouldn't be able to sell them at a farm stand. It's a pumpkin carver. The state was also getting into issues like how much dust was occurring from visitors to a farm. And this was a long list of rules and regulations. And the DCLD officials, who are appointed by Governor Tina Kotek, claim the major backlash to the proposals represented what they called misunderstandings about their scope and content. Now, they do say, well, yeah, we were going to prohibit sales of non-farm related products like little $2 pumpkin carvers. They also said that, well, yeah, we were also planning on not allowing a farm stand to sell farm products that their neighbors produced. And they also said, well, yeah, the changes really wouldn't have barred farm activities, though it required a number of new permits. And they said, well, yeah, and you also couldn't have a restaurant, in other words, serve food at your farm stand made from things that you actually grew yourself. In one of the cases, the changes were if you had more than 17 special events at your farm stand every year, you would then be required to buy an expensive permit and undergo what they called, believe it or not, farm quality checks, where the state essentially would go through and look at the impacts that having people come to your farm had on your farm. The governor relented after getting lit up. Now, the question remains, is this going to be on hold, or is this going to go away forever? A number of folks involved in it, including the Oregon Property Owners Association, says that they believe that, well, the legislature during their short session is going to put a quick end to it. The Trump administration now has made it official. They are investigating the Oregon Department of Education after receiving complaints alleging the state is violating civil rights laws by allowing transgenders to compete on girls' sports teams. President Donald Trump signed an executive order back in February to block transgenders from participating on sports teams consistent with their gender identity. Leanne O'Neill, chief of staff for the Center for Litigation at the America First Policy Institute, says she's sure the feds are going to find Oregon is violating that. She believes that's backed up by a number of lawsuits they have already filed in Oregon within the last few months. Now, Oregon law, the way that it's written, allows transgender students to compete on sex-segregated sports teams that match, and I'll quote the rules, their consistently asserted gender identity. And the law says they cannot be excluded on the basis of their gender identity. 3 high school track and field athletes say that violates Title IX. They filed a lawsuit against Oregon this month seeking to overturn all sports records set by transgender athletes and prevent them from participating in girls' sporting events. Now, in another lawsuit, Tigard High School graduate Alexa Anderson said the Oregon School Activities Association retaliated after she, Anderson, and another athlete protested a transgender athlete who competed. Now, they were on the awards podium, and they stepped off of it to protest. And the Oregon State Athletic Association officials brusquely whisked them away and never gave any of them their medals. The U.S. Education Department's Office of Civil Rights opened the official Oregon investigation based on a complaint by the America First Policy Institute alleging high school-aged female athletes had lost medals and competitive opportunities to transgender athletes. This follows a probe, by the way, that's already been launched this year into Portland Public Schools and the state's governing body for high school sports, the Oregon School Activities Association, over alleged violations of Title IX for allowing transgenders to compete in girls' sports. Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Craig Traynor, said that the administration will not let educational institutions receive federal funds to continue, in their words, trampling on women's rights. A spokesperson for the Oregon Department of Education says, "We don't comment on investigations." A spokesperson for the Oregon School Athletics Association says, "We don't have any comment." In a somewhat surprising move, and following up on a story that we reported here, I think, a couple of weeks ago, it was a fairly surprising move by the White House. They released millions of dollars to Oregon schools Friday, somewhat ending a hold that stifled some education programs and services. Now, originally, the Trump administration froze about $6.8 billion in grants to schools nationwide on June 30th, the day before the funding is usually sent out. Oregon's total loss in that case was $73 million. Well, now the White House has released about $1.3 billion out of that 6.8. It's not known at this point how much Oregon is going to be getting. The decision came after some bipartisan wrangling in Congress, and Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield says that he's trying to figure out what the effects are going to be. Several members of Oregon's congressional delegation are now calling on the public and state lawmakers to rally support and more taxpayer dollars for Planned Parenthood clinics. This follows their loss of federal funding. Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette CEO Dr. Sarah Kennedy said that she was grateful that the legislature gave them $10 million of taxpayer-funded support from the legislature in the last session, but she says they're burning through that money fast and may need to close clinics. I doubt this will go anywhere, but a petition to recall Governor Tina Kotek has now been submitted to the State Elections Division. It cites allegations of failed leadership and violations of her oath of office. The prospective petition, filed by a Lapine man, accuses Governor Kotek of prioritizing the interests of undocumented immigrants over law-abiding Oregonians and claims her administration has neglected key constituencies like veterans, low-income families, and victims of crime. Well, this is, shall we say, part of the aftermath of the long legislative session. Wildfire survivors who receive settlements from an at-fault utility, like in the 2020 Labor Day fires that burned over 1 million acres here in the western side of the Cascades, those people that won those settlements are now on the hook for federal taxes after 2 Oregon Democrats in the Oregon legislature were able to make amendments that completely tanked a bill that had already passed with bipartisan support in the Oregon Senate. Senate Bill 926 would have required the utilities that were found at fault for causing wildfires, they would have to pay the required federal taxes on the settlements. But 2 Democratic representatives in the House, Jason Krupp and Pam Marsh, started diddling with it. And they added amendments that many thought in the House actually gave cover to utilities from liability, and also a state-funded study on wildfire risk. And because of the costs of the study, that meant the bill ended up in the Ways and Means Committee, where bills are sent to die, which it did. Congratulations, Jason Krupp and Pam Marsh. Job well done. Oregon lawmakers approved $15 million last month for immigrants facing deportation, with the money used for free taxpayer-funded legal fees. The so-called Universal Representation Program provides state money to assist illegal aliens who need legal help with their applications, work authorization, or challenging deportation actions. Okay, we reported on this for a number of months. After a deluge, a tsunami of Oregonians reporting issues receiving paid leave or unemployment from the Oregon Employment Department, Governor Tina Kotek finally demanded the organization come up with an improvement plan. The governor sent her demands in a letter to OED Director Andrew Stolfi, telling the new department leader to improve customer service, period. The letter comes after the department transitioned its online unemployment insurance system in March of 2024, well over a year ago, to a new system called Francis Online, which has been, and typical Oregon style, a complete and utter disaster, with thousands of Oregonians spending hours on hold with the employment department, having their calls dropped, and receiving little to no response from the Oregon Employment Department about their delayed or canceled payments. Now, many who were already receiving unemployment benefits were booted out of the system when Francis went online with absolutely no explanation, and they were unable to contact any actual human beings. The list of problems was nearly endless and continues to this day. And You can tell why in the governor's letter. She told the OED director to review what needs to be improved at the agency within 90 days and obtain feedback from OED employees. And within 60 days of that, the governor wants Stolfi to send her a plan for the future of Francis Online. Additionally, the governor demanded a plan to improve customer service for Paid Leave Oregon and unemployment insurance. Specifically, Kotek said the plan should include goals for addressing long customer wait times, with which, by the way, the Employment Department has been saying for well over a year, oh, it's getting better. She also wants payment timeliness addressed and claims processing, along with recommendations for the use of other approaches for customer service. Now, OED, in their defense, tried to say, well, we have high traffic and it's difficult for us. High traffic. So, lawsuits last week accused 3 more former Oregon Youth Authority staff members of sexually abusing juvenile prisoners. It is the latest in a series of lawsuits that essentially states or asserts there was a culture of indifference towards child sexual abuse within the state's youth detention centers. The latest allegations of abuse by teenagers include a group life counselor, a former correctional officer, and a pediatrician inside facilities employed by the state's youth authority. The attorney bringing the latest lawsuits, Peter Jancy, said, at this point, it's not about a few bad apples, but rather a larger system protecting predators from silencing victims. 3 female victims accuse a correctional officer at Hillcrest of sexually abusing them between 1999 and 2008 while they were as young as 15. They allege that this officer groped them and masturbated while watching them in the shower. Another woman accused an Oak Creek group life coordinator of sexually abusing her starting when she was 16. Jancy said she reported the coordinator to the Oregon State Police in 2011, and guess what happened? Nothing. An additional lawsuit alleges that a former Hillcrest staffer abused a boy. The lawsuit states that when the boy tried to tell someone, he was told he had to withdraw his complaint or he would not be having any more family visits. And an additional lawsuit was filed with more accusations against pediatrician Edward Gary Edwards, a.k.a. Dr. Coldfingers, a longtime pediatrician for the state who died in February. The total number of victims with pending lawsuits against that one pediatrician alone, 51 of them. And so far, the claims have topped over $250 million. Just all a part of Oregon's war on kids that actually could use some constructive help. All right, that is a look at your Oregon Crazy News. Sean Sutherland, you wacky devil, thanks for bringing it to us. And Rick, it's time for you to roll out a little bit of industrial reel.